Hello, and welcome to this Rain Taxi virtual event. It's our first of 2022 and a great way to begin. I'm Eric Lorber, the director of Rain Taxi. We're a nonprofit organization that champions aesthetically adventurous literature, the kind you'll hear about tonight. I invite you to check out our website anytime after this event to learn more about our quarterly magazine and other programs that we put on to celebrate literature. Whether you're an occasional visitor with us or you'd like to become a member, we'd love to have you along for the ride. Tonight's program is co sponsored by the Global Poetry Initiative at Metro State University. Now, in its 13th year, Global Poetry is an annual celebration that features acclaimed voices from our constantly changing world. Indeed. And again, we are so thrilled to have their participation and support tonight that allows us to bring all these wonderful people here. Rain Taxi also receives support from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Minnesota State Arts Board. But our most important supporters are individual readers. So if you're able to pitch in a little something for tonight's free event, feel free to use the donate button at the bottom of your screen. And please know that even a small gift makes a big difference. There are many ways to participate on your screen tonight. Many of you are chiming in on the chat. It's so great to have all of you with us, sharing your observations and locations and all your other enthusiasms. If you have a question, use the ask a question box because we will have a short Q&A with audience questions at the end of tonight's event. And there is a buy the book button. And if you hit that button, you'll be taken to a page where you can purchase either of the books created by the people on your screen tonight. While I'm on that subject, those books are first Smiling in an Old Photograph. This is the brand new chapbook published by Rain Taxi, poems by Ki-taek from a variety of books in his career. And this has been translated by Bok Lee, who's with us here tonight, and Yang Yun Mi, who could not make it. But I know that Ed, as a stalwart of the Minnesota literary community, will ably represent his team. We are also privileged to celebrate tonight this wonderful book, The World's Lightest Motorcycle by Iwan. This is published by Zephyr Press and translated by E.J. Ko and Marci Calabretta Cancio-Bello. And both of these books, I want to tell you, have fantastic prose essays by the translators that really situate the poetry we're being introduced to. It just feels like a marvel to me to have the chance to encounter this magnificent poetry and to get a sense of the tradition and the life experience behind it. So, for all of the poets and translators involved, I'm deeply grateful. And we're going to go deeper into that world thanks to Lee Herrick, poet and on screen, who's going to moderate the conversation. And thanks also to Bomi Yoon Newman, who will be interpreting for our Korean guests. I hope you enjoy the presentation. And again, put your questions in the question box. We'll come back at the end before we close out. Meanwhile, take it away, Lee.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And thank you so much to you and Linda and everyone at Rain Taxi and to all the sponsors. And a special thanks to Bok Lee for bringing us all together. I feel very joyful and my heart feels full in this moment. This is a special time for Korean poetry, and it's a special time for Korean American poetry. So thank you all for being here with us today, wherever you're tuning in from, Korea or the US or whatever time zone you're in. It's an honor to moderate this conversation in celebration of two remarkable Korean poets' new books translated into English, Ki-taek's Smiling in an Old Photograph and Iwan's The World's Largest Motorcycle. Eric held them up already, but I want to as well because I have copies. They're gorgeous inside and out, and I hope you'll be able to get a copy. I'm looking so forward to the conversation tonight. Tonight's program will unfold something like this. We will first have a bit of conversation with the two authors, and then we'll have a round robin reading from the two poets. in addition to readings in English from the translators. And as Eric mentioned, time permitting at the end, he'll return to moderate a Q&A from the audience. Before we begin, I'd like to read a few words from two noted poets about tonight's authors and their books. Poet Jennifer Kwan Dobbs writes about Kim Ki-taek smiling in an old photograph. These unflinching poems witness the darkness under the eyelids, the eyes and senses gripped by hungers and South Korean capitalism's harms. With surgical precision, Kim Ki-taek takes apart that moment of violence, writing into a body, and insists on the body's power to write otherwise. These revelations, essential to us all, arrive for the first time in English, thanks to Bok Lee and Yang Yoon-mi's lucid translation. Their accomplishment is an invitation to one of South Korea's most provocative 21st century poets. And poet Dawn Mi Che writes about Yi Won's The World's Lightest Motorcycle. Yi Won is one of the most fascinating and exciting poets to emerge after the oppressive decades of South Korea's military dictatorship. Yi Won's highly inventive poetry creates a new surreal terrain in which bodies and everyday objects, capitalist commodities, exist side by side and interact, often violently. E.J. Ko and Marci Calabretta Cancio-Bello, two brilliant Korean-American poets, have invented astonishing language for Yi Won's subversive poetry. This is where I would normally ask for applause, but I hope everyone can send the two authors your good energies. So maybe we can start with a question. And this would be for Miss Yi and Ki-taek. Could you talk about how this collaboration came about and what it feels like to have the book translated into English?
네, 먼저 질문을 시작하겠습니다. 이원 선생님, 김기택 선생님 두 분 다 어떤 경위에서 이 작업이 시작이 됐는지, 어떻게 해서 시작이 됐는지, 그리고 번역 과정은 어땠는지 좀 설명해 주시겠습니까?
제가 먼저 말씀드려요. 예, 리 선생님하고 양은미 선생님이 제 시집에 관심을 보여서 이제 그 한국 번역 KLTI 이제 그 의뢰를 해서 번역을 하시게 됐고요. 저는 이제 두 분께서 충분히 제 시집에 대해서 관심을 보여서 그 번역을 이제 잘 해주신 것 같은데 아직 저는 이제 번역 과정에서 조금 더 적극적으로 커뮤니케이션을 했으면 더 좋았겠다. 제가 그 부분에서 충분히 서포트를 못 해드린 거에 대해서 좀 죄송하게 생각하고 있습니다. 아직 제가 번역 책은 못 받았고요. 예, 지금 통관 중에 있습니다. 예.
That's a very great question. At first, Bok Lee and Yang Eun-mi had shown interest in my book, and through a Korean organization that specializes in interpretation and translation, the translation process has begun. One thing that I regret about this whole translation process is that I was not a more active participant in communication. I wish I had participated a little more. I haven't yet received my translation book, so I'm looking forward to reading the English translation as well.
저는 그 최돈미 선생님의 그 소개로 우리 두 번역자분들과 이어졌고, 그리고 여러 해 동안 이 번역이 굉장히 마치 해가 지고 또 해가 뜨는 것처럼 그렇게 번역이 진행되었어요. 그리고 그 안에서 제가 기여한 것은 그렇게 크지 않고 우리 그 번역자 선생님들께서 어떻게 보면 한국어라는 것 속에서 다른 언어, 그러니까 영어로 제 시를 발굴하는 손이 되어 주셨다는 것을 제가 이번에 저는 이제 이미 받았는데 시집을 보고 알았습니다. 그래서 뭐 다른 것보다도 저는 두 멋진 번역자 선생님들께 깊은 감사를 많이 드리고 있습니다. 예.
I was introduced to the two translators and the process the span of the process was over several years. The several years was like the sun rising and the sun falling. I honestly didn't do much for the translation. It was the poets, the translators, who did everything. I felt like they were excavating something new within a different language. So all my thanks and gratitude go to my wonderful translators.
Thank you. It is an art, translation, I think, as much as the poetry. So this reminds me that in Ms. Yi's book, at the end, there's a wonderful translator's notes portion that sheds a lot of light on the process and the book. And Ed wrote a marvelous introduction to Smiling in an Old Photograph, so I hope everyone can read those. And also just a note to Ed and Marci and EJ and everyone, if you'd like to chime in, please feel free, okay? So how about we can hear some poems. I think what we'll do is have Ms. Yi read a poem first, and then one of the translators will read that poem in English.
이원 선생 음소거 해제 안 됐어요.
Sorry. 검고 불룩한 TV와 나 1. 1990년산 TV와 1968년산 나는 어둠 속에 있다. 낙타와 시간은 사막에 그냥 두고 왔다. 달빛이 흐릿하게 묻은 1990년산 TV와 1968년산 내 몸은 검고 불룩하다. 1968년산 나는 쭈그리고 앉아 1990년산 TV를 영혼처럼 들여다본다. 2. 1990년산 TV와 1968년산 나, 생산 연도가 있는 것들, 제품 번호가 붙여진 것들, 뜨거운 것들, 뭉클거리는 것들, 어쩌자고 내 몸속에서 꺼지지 않는 TV, 내 몸에게로 나를 송출하는 TV, 난지도 TV, 검고 불룩한 달 속의 물, 물 속의 몸, 열 수 없는 우물, 끌 수 없는 창, 어둠 속에 웅크리고 있는 것들, 퍼덕이는 것들. 3. 내 몸속엔 20년 전 죽었다는 썩지 않는 풍문의 아버지가 하나, 녹슨 삽 하나, 녹슨 눈물 한 방울, 고철로 구겨진 발 둘, 뼈와 쇠숟가락, 모래로 채워진 사냥의 눈 둘, 깨진 거울, 비닐봉지, 지는 별, 지는 봄, 지는 봄의 등에 걸린 지는 해, 수평선을 넘지 못하는 해 속의 물, 돌밭, 한밤의 검고 불룩한 TV, TV에 병렬 케이블로 연결된 무덤이 둘, 또 둘.
Dark and bulging TV and me. 1. A TV from 1990 and my body made in 1968 are inside a darkness. A camel and time were left in the desert. Moonlight vaguely tainted the TV from 1990 and my body from 1968 is dark and bulging. In 1968, I crouch. I peer like a ghost into the 1990 TV. 2. The TV from 1990 and my body from 1968. Products with the year they were made. Products with serial numbers. Products that scald. Bulky products. Somehow the TV in my body won't turn off. The TV broadcasts me to my body. TV dumped at the Nanji Island landfill. Water inside the dark, bulging TV. Body underwater. The well that can't be opened. The window that can't be turned off. Things crouching in the darkness. Fluttering things. 3. Inside me is the father of an indisputable rumor, not decomposing, who has been dead 20 years. Rusted spade, rusted teardrop, pair of feet dented by scrap metal, bone and brass spoon, goat's eyes full of sand, shattered mirror, plastic bag, shooting star, the end of spring, the last drum of spring caught on the setting sun. The water inside the sun can't cross the horizon. A field of stones. Midnight's dark and bulging TV. 2 rows of graves are connected to the TV with cables. 2 more.
What a beautiful, beautiful, stunning poem. Thank you both. And now, could we have a poem? Mr. Kim, would you like to read a poem?
네. 옛날 사진 속에서 웃고 있는 나를 보고 있다. 카메라를 쳐다보는 순간 정지해 있는 나를. 22살에서 정지된 내 나이를. 48kg에서 정지된 내 몸무게를. 아직도 30년 전의 짜장면을 소화시키고 있는 내 배를. 무엇이 즐거운지 이빨이 다 보이도록 벌어져 있는 내 웃음을. 웃음 때문에 증오가 조금 지워지고 있는 내 표정을. 웃음 속의 내 지석을. 내가 보고 있다. 너무 많이 변하여 한 번도 나였던 적이 없던 내가. 시간을 겹겹이 처바르고 껴입어 이제는 전혀 다른 인간인 내가. 시간의 열기와 압력으로 튀겨지고 뒤틀려진 구겨진 내가. 이미 늙은 생각이 두개골에 가득 찬 내가. 수백 번 고이고 배철한 후에 이제 막 새 정액으로 갈아 넣은 고안을 달고 있는 내가. 나를 보고 있다. 찬물에 빨래핀으로 머리 감은 나를. 빵꾸난 양말을 구두로 가리고 있는 나를. 누런 냄새나는 속옷을 양복으로 가리고 있는 나를. 겁 많은 눈을 어색한 웃음으로 가리고 있는 나를. 자폐적인 웃음을 겸손처럼 보이는 침묵으로 가리고 있는 나를. 빛에 낱낱이 드러났는데도 여전히 사진 속에서 숨을 곳을 찾는 나를. 내가 보고 있다. 소닥돼지를 열심히 씹어 비듬과 무좀으로 만들고 있는 내가. 옆머리를 빗어올려 가까스로 가린 대머리로 무언가를 생각하려고 애쓰는 내가, 건조되고 있는 안구로 자꾸 뭘 보려는 내가, 뒤꿈치에서 각질이 벗겨지는 발로 어딘가를 부지런히 가고 있는 내가, 아직도 수염에서 슬픔과 두려움이 자라고 있는 내가.
Ed, sorry, Ed, you're muted, I believe.
Smiling in an old photograph. I am being looked at, stopped at the moment of peering into the camera. My age stopped at 22. My weight stopped at 48 kilograms. My stomach digesting jjajangmyeon 30 years ago. My ear-to-ear grin. For reasons unknown, so happy. My hatred fading away thanks to my smile, plaque revealed in my smile. I am looking, I, who have never been the real me because too much has changed. The I who is totally different from who I was layers and layers of time ago. The I who is fried, twisted, and wrinkled by the heat and pressure of time. The I whose head has already been filled with old thoughts. The I whose balls have been filled with new semen and ejaculated hundreds of times. I am being looked at, the me that washed my hair in cold water using laundry soap. The me hiding hold socks with shoes. The me hiding faded, smelly underwear with a suit. The me hiding timid eyes with an awkward smile. The me hiding my unsociable shyness with silence in the guise of modesty. The me still looking where to hide myself despite everything being fully revealed in the light. I am looking, the I who produces dandruff and athlete's foot by diligently chewing beef, chicken, and pork. The I who tries to think with a combed over balding head. The I who keeps trying to see something through drying eyeballs. The I who walks industriously, sloughing calloused heels. The I whose sadness and fear still grows in my facial hair.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much. Miss Yi, would you please read another poem?
거울을 위하여. 거울. 내가 들여다보면 내가 사라져 버리는 벽 또는 언어. 살그머니 들어갈 것. 두리번거리지 말 것. 의심하지 말 것. 거울 속으로 손을 뻗지 말 것. 뒤 돌아보지 말 것. 어제의 시간과 내일의 시간이 거울로 걸어 들어와 조우한다. 북받쳐 올라 서로 아무 말 못한다. 쓰다듬지도 못한다. 한없이 쳐다보고만 있다. 거울을 보면 입을 다물게 되는 이유다. 거울을 들여다본다. 시간이 움찔한다. 한두 번 그러는 것도 아닌데 매번 그런다. 거울 속에서 내 얼굴이 천천히 흘러가고 있다. 나는 꽃잎도 아닌데, 더욱 나는 불빛도 아닌데. 흐르는 것들은 제 안에 골짜기를 감추고 있어. 어둠 속에는 어둠이, 구름 속에는 구름이, 모래 속에는 모래가, 씨앗 속에는 씨앗이, 허공 속에는 허공이, 거울 속에는 거울이, 얼굴 속에는 얼굴이 들어있다. 사람들은 종종 타인의 얼굴에 시선을 자석처럼 붙이고 따라가며 구경한다. 시간의 창이기 때문이다. 사람들은 자신의 얼굴을 볼 때는 멈칫한다. 시간의 벽이기 때문이다. 질주하는 몸은 공포로 가득 찬 몸이다. 거울 속으로 달려가면 거울 끝에 벽이 있다. 질주하던 몸은 날계란처럼 터진다. 사람들은 눈앞에 보이는 벽 때문에 바로 뒤의 벽을 떠올리지 못한다. 진짜 벽을 감추기 위한 거울의 위장술이다. 거울은 진화한다. 거울을 스칠 때마다 얼굴이 베인다. 거울에 베인 내 얼굴에는 시간이 핏물처럼 스민다. 거울의 꿈은 제 내부를 온전하게 텅 비우는 것이다. 꿈은 이루어지지 않을 때까지만 꿈인 것이어서 거울은 계속 실존한다. 벽 속에서 거울이 투명하게 썩어간다. 거울 속에 나도 투명하게 썩어간다. 거울, 내가 밖으로 나와도 내가 사라지지 않는, 내가 갇혀서 끓고 있는 진창.
For the mirror. Mirror, the wall or language. When I look into it, I vanish. Enter quietly. Don't look around. Don't question. Don't spread your hand into the mirror. Don't look back. Yesterday's hour and tomorrow's hour enter the mirror and run into each other. They're too stunned to say anything. They don't touch each other, they just stare. This is why our lips stay shut when we look in the mirror. Though it's not the first time I look in the mirror, time always flinches. Though I'm not a petal or a light, I slowly drift in the mirror. The things that drift have a valley hidden inside, darkness inside darkness, cloud inside cloud, sand inside sand, seed inside seed, void inside void, mirror inside mirror, face inside face. People are drawn like a magnet to other people's faces because others' faces are windows of time. People hesitate at seeing their own faces because their reflections are a wall of time. The speeding body is full of fear. It rushes inside the mirror to the end of the wall. The speeding body bursts against it like a raw egg. People can't see the wall behind the wall right in front of them. The mirror puts on a disguise to hide the real wall. The mirror is evolving. Every time I brush past the mirror, my face gets cut. Time seeps like blood into my cut face. The dream of the mirror will drain my insides. A dream is only a dream while unattained, so the mirror continues to exist. Inside the wall, the clear mirror rots away. The transparent eye inside the mirror also rots. Mirror, I emerge from it without vanishing. I am trapped in boiling sludge.
Oh my goodness. What a marvelous poem. The dream of the mirror will drain my insides. Thank you both very much, very much. Mr. Kim, will you please read another poem?
Yeah. Next poem I read is this Korean poetry books, chewing gum. 껌. 누군가 씹다 버린 껌. 이빨 자국이 선명하게 남아있는 껌. 이미 찍힌 이빨 자국 위에 다시 찍히고 무수히 찍힌 이빨 자국들을 하나도 버리거나 지우지 않고 작은 몸속에 겹겹이 구겨 넣어 작고 동그란 덩어리로 뭉쳐 넣은 껌. 그 많은 이빨 자국 속에서 지금은 고요히 화석의 시간을 보내고 있는 껌. 고기를 찢고 열매를 부수던 힘이 아무리 짓이겨도 다 짓이겨지지 않고 조금 더 찢어지거나 부서지지도 않은 껌. 살처럼 부드러운 촉감으로 고기처럼 쫄깃한 질감으로 이빨 밑에서 발버둥 치는 팔다리 같은 물렁물렁한 탄력으로 이빨들이 잊고 있던 먼 살육의 기억을 깨워 그 피와 살과 비린내와 함께 놀던 껌. 지구의 일생 동안 이빨에 각인된 사리와 저기를 제 한 몸에 고스란히 받고 있는 껌. 마음껏 뭉개고 갈고 짓누르다 이빨이 먼저 지쳐 마지못해 놓아준 껌.
Chewing gum. Gum that someone has chewed and spat out. Gum with clearly visible teeth marks. Gum molded into a small round ball after being crumpled and folded upon itself into a tiny compact of creases without discarding or erasing even one of the countless teeth marks upon pre-existing teeth marks. Gum that is quietly spending time fossilizing. Gum neither torn nor smashed nor completely mangled. However strong the force capable of ripping through meat and cracking open nuts has gnashed it over and over. Gum soft as flesh, chewy as meat, elastic as plump limbs flailing between teeth. Awakens the teeth to long forgotten memories of carnage. Relishable blood, flesh, and stench. Gum that has absorbed into its body a murderous intent and hostility stamped by teeth throughout the history of this earth. Gum that has been squashed, ground, and pressed to its fullest, then grudgingly released because the teeth were exhausted first.
Thank you so much. This poem reminds me of what you called in the introduction, Ed, Kim Ki-taek's singular compression. That line, elastic as plump limbs flailing between teeth, awakens the teeth to long forgotten memories of carnage. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We might have time for another poem, hopefully, but maybe at this point we could open it up. And I have a question in mind for the translators, and I think as many of the audience may well know, these are remarkable, award-winning poets. In EJ's case, also memoirist, and their translation work has just it's deeply moving. So I'm wondering if the translators, maybe we could start with Ed or whoever wants to jump in. Can you talk about the work of translation in general, or what draws you to translation, and also with this book, and what kinds of challenges or joys or surprises did you encounter in this process? Maybe let's say Marci.
네, 그러면 제가 세 번째 시를 let me read my third poems.
선생님 지금은 그 번역가들에게 질문을 하고 잠시 후에 지금 이제
네네네.
네, 다시 시낭송 부탁드리겠습니다.
네네.
So EJ or Marci maybe, or Ed, could you talk about any surprises or what the process was like, joys, challenges in the process? I'll say EJ, how's that?
Sure. Thank you so much, Lee. You're doing amazing here, and I can't imagine anyone else bringing this many people together so fluidly. So thank you, and you yourself are just an amazing poet, artist, so on, award winner of everything. So well aware of what an honor it is that you're here with us. Yeah, I'm going to approach your question peripherally because I want to go where my heart goes. And it's really that I so admire Iwon as a poet, but also as a teacher. And she talks a lot about what she teaches her students and how she talks to them about what is visible and what is invisible, and how those two things exist simultaneously, almost like horizontal and vertical networks. And that, like, having a good grasp of that allows you to see beauty in things you've never seen before, or to recognize something is wonderful even though you've never heard of that before. And so ways to almost prepare ourselves for the things unknown, that was such a shocking revelation for me as a translator, poet, but also just a human being deep down in my heart. So I'm really grateful for that.
I love that, the preparing for things unknown and how it connects to just being human. That's wonderful. Marci, what was it like for you? Or any surprises or challenges?
I mean, I think there were so many. For me, I wasn't really sure what to expect from the collaboration, but I think it was more of a joy to be able to shepherd this work into English with someone I love very dearly and have been friends with for many years, and to discover my own pleasure at every unexpected line that Iwon writes, and to think about the role of the translator as really advocating for someone's work to take up space in another language, and think about what that means for the poet, and sort of stepping aside and letting that happen. And just from, I think, a technical standpoint, it allows you to challenge your own assumptions of language and what the leaps of poetry are doing from one language to the next, or in your own mind. And even in speaking with a co-translator, to be able to have that kind of camaraderie in speaking about the process and asking questions of each other and asking questions of Iwon and her work it was really exciting. Her work is so vast and incredible. We were never sure what one poem might open up to the next poem, and it was really a wonderful part of the process.
I feel like I could listen to the both of you and translators in general talk about the magic or surprise and the leaps and the unknown so much. So thank you both. I'm also wondering, just dare I say, I'm having a moment of pragmatism and logistics, but from start to finish, you know, from committing and saying we're going to translate this book, how much time did it take? Was it a few years, a couple years?
How long was that, Marci? Maybe 7 years? It was a long time. It was quite a while.
Good. I don't feel so bad now.
I think it was 2015 that we first started, that we first connected all together.
Right, with Donmi and Kim Hye-soon, sort of the Korean women poet sisterhood united around then. And that's what happened.
I love that. Well, the 7 years paid off. It's a stunning book. So thank you all. Ed, what was it like for you and your co-translator, to the extent you can speak for her? And she regrettably was unable to attend. She does send everyone her regrets. But Ed, what was it like for you in the way of challenges or surprises in this process?
Yeah, so I left Korea when I was 6, and though I had always wanted, you know, as I got to write poetry, to translate, you know, Korean poetry, my confidence was not there. For some reason, I had the hubris to think I could translate because I studied Russian. So I actually started translating Russian into English in 1993. I got a grant to go to Kazakhstan and research racism in the former Soviet Union. And I was able to meet with a bunch of writers who were ethnic Koreans writing in Russian and Koreumar, a kind of former, a dialect spoken in the North. I won't go into the long history, but in 1937, Stalin sort of shipped all the ethnic Koreans in Russia to Kazakhstan, along with Volga Germans and Jews and anyone pretty much undesirable. So there they had lived and they had grown, and there were writers writing in Russian and in Korean. And so I started translating their work, like Anatoly Kim, and I was, and a number of Boris Pak, from the Russian to English. But I just didn't feel comfortable doing Korean to English translations, especially for poetry. And then in 2014, I had the good fortune of meeting Yang Eun-mi, a writer and now translator, at the Toji Cultural Center in South Korea. And we were talking, and I asked, because she had studied in Scotland, and I asked, well, you know, have you translated? And she had not. And so I thought maybe we should collaborate. And Mr. Kim's book happened to be in the library there. And we thought this would be perfect for many reasons I can go into, such as just the innovative, unexpected, what rage becomes in his work, among many other things. So we started translating in 2014. And it's a long slog and certainly worth it, but I wish it could have been faster or sooner. And so since then, we've worked on some other poets, and Ms. Yang has done some novels and short stories as well.
I think it's fascinating when you're talking about that shifting confidence and what rage becomes, and maybe we can talk about that in a little while. But it's interesting that you started this process in 2014, and I can imagine the work, but just speaking for myself, these are books that will be in the English readership, if you will, in perpetuity, classrooms and homes and everywhere else for people to enjoy. So I'm wondering, maybe we can bring in everyone on this question, and maybe directing this first to Mr. Kim. It's probably difficult to capture Korean poetry or Korean poetry in a short answer, but what do you think audiences should know about contemporary Korean poetry? If there was something that, whether it's that rage or your background, I know you were an orphan in your bio, or the poetics, the aesthetics, what is it about Korean poetry that listeners and readers should know? And maybe Bomi could help if necessary.
지금 채팅으로 보내드리긴 했지만 김기택 선생님께 이건 모든 분들에게 질문을 할 겁니다. 근데 김기택 선생님 먼저 질문에 답해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 한국 시를 간단하게 요약 설명하기는 힘들겠지만 현대 한국 시에 대해서 미국의 관객들이 꼭 알아야 할 몇 가지가 있다면 무엇일까요?
예, 그 짧은 시간에 말씀드리기 굉장히 어려운 문제인데요. 대략 한국에서는 과거에는, 옛날에는 중국의 영향을 받아서 한시라든지 시조라든지 이런 것들이 쓰였는데, 그 서구의 영향을 받아서 한국에서 이런 서구 형태로 시를 쓰게 된 지는, 그 역사는 100년이 조금 넘고요. 그 동안에 이제 1950년에 있었던 한국 전쟁, 그리고 그 후에 산업화와 민주화, 이런 것들에 의해서 한국시가 굉장히 크게 변하고 현대화되었습니다. 그래서 한국에서는 소설 못지않게 시도 활발하게 읽고 있고요. 시인들도 많이 배출되고 있고, 요즘은 정말 하루가 다르게 변하고 있다고 해도 과언이 아닐 만큼 한국시가 굉장히 빠르게 변하고 그 역동적인 모습을 보여주고 있습니다.
That is a very difficult question to explain in a very short, limited time. However, if I can do my best. So in the past, Korean poetry was heavily influenced by China. After the Western influence in China is what we call modern Korean poetry, and it's a little over 100 years history. It would be sometime around 1950 when the Korean War broke out. And then after that, industrialization and democratization. All of these historical significant events have brought changes to the society and also modernized the society. Right now, or today, novels, poetry is not only highly acclaimed. Novels used to be the only highly acclaimed form. If novels were the only highly acclaimed form of literature, poetry is also now, it's caught up and it's now one of the most popular forms of literature. There are so many poets, and every day it's changing, and Korean poetry is changing every day.
Miss Yi, any thoughts?
김기택 시인께서 어떤 한국의 그 역사적인 배경은 다 말씀을 해주셨기 때문에 저는 그러니까 한국 현대시가 가지는 그냥 그 어떤 정서적인 감각적인 것을 말씀을 짧게 드리면은 이 한국 뭐 예를 들면 노래도 그렇고 이렇게 듣는 사람들이 그것을 굉장히 역동적이라고 느끼는데 한국 현대시의 한국 시의 특징도 뜨거운 언어인 것 같습니다. 그래서 지금 오늘 같이 이 낭독을 하는 김기택 선생님이나 제가 쓰는 시는 약간 거리를 두고 묘사의 형태로 시를 쓰고 있는데 이런 시임에도 불구하고 항상 그러니까 뛰어들어서 쓰는 것 같아요. 그래서 저희 한국 시가 미국에서도 많이 지금 읽히고 있다고 들었는데 한국 시를 읽을 때는 바라보는 자리에서 읽어주시기보다는 뛰어들어서 그 언어를 한번 경험해 보시는 것, 직접 경험해 보시는 것, 그렇게 하시면은 충분히 한국 그 시가 영어로 읽힐 때도 전달이 되지 않을까 그런 생각을 합니다. 예.
If Mr. Kim Ki-taek has talked about the historical aspect of Korean modern poetry, I'll talk about the emotional aspect. Like many Korean songs, the Korean language is very dynamic. I want to call Korean language hot. We both write with a distance. We tend to describe things and phenomenons, but when you actually read the poem, you feel like you are actually in it and experiencing it. So that would be my tip to readers, is that rather than taking it as a reader, become one with the poetry, the poems, and jump in the poems and fully experience it.
I love that so much. The heat and the hotness of it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Miss Yi. That might be a good segue to read one more poem, if that's possible. Mr. Kim, would you have one more poem that you could share with us? And then we'll have one from Miss Yi.
Yeah, sure. Let me read I Met His Eyes. 그와 눈이 마주쳤다. 잠깐 그와 눈이 마주쳤다. 낯이 많이 익은 얼굴이었지만 누구인지는 전혀 기억이 나지 않았다. 너무나도 낯선 낯익음에 당황하여 나는 한동안 그에게서 눈을 떼지 못했다. 그도 내가 누구인지 잠시 생각하는 눈치였다. 그는 쓰레기 봉투를 뒤지고 있었다. 그는 고양이 가죽 안에 들어가 있었다. 오랫동안 직립이 몸에 배었는지 네 발로 걷는 것이 좀 어색해 보였다. 그는 쓰레기 뒤지는 일을 방해한 나에게 항의라도 하듯 야옹 하고 감정을 실어 울더니 뜻밖의 아기 울음소리가 터지는 제 목소리가 이상해서 견딜 수 없다는 듯 얼른 입을 다물었다. 그는 다른 고양이들처럼 서둘러 달아나지 않았다. 슬픈 동작을 들킨 제 모습에 화가 난 듯 고개를 숙이더니 굽은 등으로 천천히 돌아서서 한참 동안 멀어져 갔다.
This is a great opportunity to just give a little glimpse into the translation process. Mr. Kim, obviously wrote the poem in Korean and translated it himself as I Met His Eyes. Ms. Yang and I, and we went back and forth on this title and pretty much every line. That's why it took, several years. We translated the poem the poem's title not as I Met His Eyes, but My Eyes Met His. And we put more thought into that, and I could go into that, but my eyes met his. My eyes met his for a moment. His face was familiar, but I couldn't remember who he was. Bewildered by the familiar oddness of unfamiliarity, I couldn't take my eyes off him. He, too, seemed to ponder who I was. He was rummaging through a garbage bag, he was inside the skin of a cat, as if he were used to standing upright, walking on 4 feet looked awkward, as if complaining to me who had disturbed his ransacking. Meow, he let out with feeling. Then, as if this sound, like a baby crying, were unbearable to his own ears, he just as quickly shut up. He didn't run away like other cats. As if angry over his own sad figure being caught in the act, he lowered his head, turning slowly, back arched, and meowed, and moved off into the distance for a long time.
Such compelling poetry. Thank you. Thank you both very much. And Miss Yi, would you please read one more poem?
자화상. 머리를 일산시장 좌판에 내놓았는데 며칠이 지나도 사가는 사람이 없다. 머리를 옥션 경매에 올렸는데 클릭을 해도 머리에서 모래시계가 생겨나지 않는다는 연락이 왔다. 머리를 벼룩시장 난전에 가져갔더니 대뜸 풍선처럼 불어본다. 쭈글쭈글한 머리가 조금씩 펴지고 입이 벌어진다. 남의 지문을 씹고 있는 입은 다행히 아직 울부짖지는 않는다.
Self-portrait. I put my head on display at Ilsan Market, but after several days, nobody bought it. I put my head up for auction online, but got a notification that when you click my head, an hourglass appears, a loading error. I take my head to a flea market, but somebody blows it up like a balloon, and my wrinkled head gradually smooths out, and my mouth chews on somebody else's fingerprints, and to my great relief, my mouth has yet to howl.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. The imagination in that poem and in all of Miss Yi's poems is so striking and so evocative. And so thank you for those poems. And one last question maybe from me, and then I imagine that there will be some questions from the audience that Eric could moderate. But would the translators be willing to speak to, just in general, whether it's an intellectual or an emotional or a spiritual connection or feeling for these poets? What is it about these poets that you love so much in their work? What could you just speak to that from the heart, or whatever comes to mind, what you admire about these poets' work? And you're all probably going to be polite and defer, so I'll just be the one to say, Ed, would you mind starting off with that?
Sure. One thing I really appreciated, the way I've, just to kind of build off of what was said by the poets themselves, Mr. Kim's work to me reminds me of an alloy that conducts heat, such as copper, aluminum, yet itself doesn't get hot. It remains, and I think Miss Yi referred to this objectivity, that they both have this sort of objective quality to their poetry, and I would agree. But within that alloy-like conduit, that itself doesn't get hot. Great heat can transfer to the reader, great force, emotion. The emotion is so compressed. I really appreciate how the metaphysical and the emotional come together in his work, and also the bodily. His work is very bodily, very carnal, and all three of those things and many others come together in unique ways.
Wonderful, thank you, Ed. And EJ or Marci, would you mind speaking to that?
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, Ed, that was so beautifully said, and I'm only adding little bits here. When I think of Ewon's poetry and where it came from, it seems like it comes from this really familiar landscape of conflict, and that conflict is historical and also very present. And despite all that, despite all the dichotomies that it produces, she writes toward a sort of coexistence of those dichotomies. And she does that by using this like unlike things, pairing them together for a radical newness. And that becomes a sort of building block for a more surreal terrain where coexistence can exist right there. And so I just feel incredibly inspired. And I feel like when I read her, I'm reading the future. And that's all I have to say.
Yes. Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, and Marci?
Yeah, I mean, very similar, I think, to what EJ is saying. Like, there's something both ancient and modern. That dichotomy is also a time thing in Ewon's work, and that's seen in everything. The images of the body integrated with technology, with ancient Buddhist tradition, joined with a camel and a mirror and spring itself. And there's something incredibly exciting about the ways that I don't know who else is writing. Like, I'm sure in the world there are others writing like this maybe, but there's something incredibly exciting about that coexistence that EJ is talking about, and something that is felt in that images like Ed is talking about, that distance creating and then transferring emotional reactivity and staying with you. Like, the thing that I love about the translation that kept me going often was that I kept thinking about these images in ways that I didn't realize I had been seeking in poetry or in language itself in some way, or even in existence. And so it felt like these were gifts across time and language to be able to carry with me and incorporate into my own body and mind in some way. And I think that for me is how I think of Ewon's work very often, and it's incredibly memorable to me to be able to work with these poems.
What a perfect way to think about this work. Thank you, Marci and EJ and Ed. I'm so deeply moved and inspired, and so thank you for your work, and to our poets and authors, Mr. Kim and Miss Yi. Thank you for your brilliance and the poetry. And a big thank you also to our translator for the evening, Bomi. Could we have a round of thanks for everyone? And I think at this point, we have a little bit of time left, so I'm going to sign out and just say thank you all. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And I hope everyone can go get the books. So thank you. And at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Eric.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you all for this wonderful time with you to get to know these books. Again, as Lee said, they're both available if you want to click that buy the book button, The World's Lightest Motorcycle, and Smiling in an Old Photograph. And as Lee said earlier, I couldn't agree more. I believe these books will last in perpetuity. When I find a translated work that I love, the thing I think immediately is, how could this book not exist? And yet, I also know that it only exists because of hard work. As we heard, it takes years, the hard work of the translators and, of course, the original creators to make this feel so inevitable. So thank you all. We do have some great questions from the audience, some for poets, some for translators. We won't get to them all, but let's start with one for the poets. Someone is asking, noting that these poems are intense explorations of self-perception, and so is wondering, does hearing the work in translation influence that perception? Do you hear something unexpected in the translation, having so, consummately crafted it to begin with?
청중 질문 첫 번째입니다. 두 시인 선생님들의 작품 모두 매우 강력하고 그 안에서 자기 인식에 대한 소재를 많이 다루는 것 같습니다. 이 과정에서 번역하는 과정에서 Sorry, Eric, can you just repeat a little bit after the self-perception and how the translation part? Yes.
Yes. Does seeing it or hearing it in translation influence that perception? Does something unexpected happen?
번역된 그 시를 봤을 때, 혹은 시 낭송을 들으셨을 때 이 선생님들의 자기 인식에 대한 어떤 변화가 생기거나 어떤 다른 느낌을 받으시는 것이 있으면 설명해 주시겠습니까?
기택 선생님하고 저한테 온 질문인가요? 그쵸? 예. 제가 먼저 마이크를 켰으니까 말씀을 드리면, 제가 영어를 잘 알지는 잘 못합니다. 근데 어떤 생각이 들었냐면, 번역된 시를 읽었을 때, 그러니까, 한국어로 쓰여진 시보다 훨씬 더 장면 이미지가 선명해졌다. 그러면 결국은 우리 번역자 선생님들께서 저의 선명성, 또 그 언어, 영어의 선명성에 가깝게 가기 위해서 많은 애를 써주셨구나 하는 것을 제가 느꼈고, 그리고 또 한 가지, 이 시라는 세계에 대한 굉장한 그 어떤 믿음을 갖고 사는데, 시라는 게 되게 이거 멋진 거구나라는 거를 확인한 것은, 한국어가 영어라는 다른 언어로 변했는데, 제가 한국어 안에, 그 시 안에, 말하자면 날달걀처럼 이렇게 넣어놓은 게 있을 거 아니에요. 시니까 숨겨진 부분이 있는데, 그게 영어에서도 똑같이 터지지 않고 숨겨져 있었다. 그래서 저한테 굉장히 마치 새롭게 쓰여진 시를 보는 것 같은 그런 느낌이었습니다. 예.
네, 저는 이제 아직 사실 책이 나온 지 얼마 안 돼서 못 받았는데요. 그렇지만 우리 버크 리 선생님이 읽는 거를 보니까 그 느낌이 잘 왔습니다. 그리고 미국의 독자들에게 이게 어떻게 느껴질까 좀 궁금하기도 하고요. 그리고 저는 이제 시를 읽을 때 사실 내 시가 번역이 돼서 다른 언어권의 독자들에게 어떻게 읽힐까? 그 번역될 것에 대해서 크게 이제 생각하지 않고 쓰는데 앞으로는 이제 시를 쓸 때 그런 내시가 번역될 때는 어떤 느낌일까? 이런 것도 조금 생각을 하게 될 것 같습니다.
I will start with Miss Yi-won's response. I do not understand English that well. When I read the translations, I was surprised that the imagery is clearer in the English translations. What that says to me is that the translators tried very, very hard to explain my ideas, my thoughts, and my voice. I really trust the world of poetry. And by what I mean by that is that Korean poetry translates perfectly into English because they are poems. It's almost like a raw egg that is hidden in my poem, written in Korean, is preserved in the English version of my poetry. But it's not the same poems. They are reborn into new poems. Mr. Kim's response: I have not yet had the chance to read my translated poems, but just listening to Ed reading my poetry, I can feel that my emotions, the emotions in my Korean versions have been very well delivered. When I write and read my own poems, I have never really thought about how it would translate into different languages, but through this experience, I think I may start to consider how it would read to different audiences.
Wonderful. That's there's so much to be excited about there. I'm going to move on to the next question, though, for each of the poets. And such an interesting question, since we were able to hear from the translators about the length of the process and that commitment. How long does it take to come up with the idea for these poems? And I think that's such an interesting question in light of the fact that both of these poets often take a simple object. We heard "For the Mirror" tonight, or chewing gum, and it seems simple or even offhand, and yet centuries seem to come into the poem somehow. So how long does it take to have the idea for and then develop these poems?
시인 두 분께 하는 질문입니다. 아까 질문에서 시 번역하는 기간에 대해서 얘기를 했었는데요. 선생님들께서는 시를 쓰실 때 그 소재를 떠올리면서 시를 완성하실 때까지 시간이 얼마나 걸리시나요? 선생님들의 시에 보면 껌 혹은 거울 같은 일상적인 소재들이 많이 다뤄지는데, 그 소재에서 아이디어에서 시작해서 한 편의 시가 완성되는데 그 과정에 대해서 궁금합니다.
글쎄요, 시마다 다르긴 하지만요. 되게 처음 쓸 때는 대부분은 단숨에 쓰게 되고요. 그것을 퇴고하는 과정은 대개 한 2달에서 또 긴 것은 1년 넘게 걸리는 것도 있습니다.
That it would differ from poem to poem, but when I write my first draft, I write it in one take. But the revision process is longer. Sometimes it takes 2 months, and sometimes it takes over a year.
저는 시마다 다 다르긴 하지만 기본적으로 많이 걸려요. 그러니까 1년은 안 걸리고 평균으로 얘기하면 한 3달, 4달 정도? 3달 정도 걸리는 것 같아요. 왜 그러냐면 저희 이제 제 주변에도 소설가 친구들이 많은데, 소설가들이 시인들이 왜 이렇게 짧은 걸 쓰는데 바쁘냐라고 맨날 묻거든요. 근데 그것이 만약에 제가 거울을 쓰면 제가 거울이 되는 과정이 시간이 걸려요. 거울이 계속돼서 정말 내가 원하는 그 거울일 때까지 살아야 되기 때문에 그 시간이 굉장히 많이 걸려서 저 같은 경우는 그게 한 3달 정도 걸리고 그러니까 결국은 마치 제가 하는 방식은 조각가가 돌에서 이렇게 형상을 만들어내는 것과 같다고 이야기할 수 있겠습니다. 작업 방식이. 예.
As Mr. Kim said, it differs from poem to poem, but I think I take longer than Mr. Kim. On average, it takes about 3 months for me to write a poem. I have a lot of novelist friends, and they always ask me, "You write something so short, but why does it take so long for you to finish writing?" If I can give you an example of the mirror poem, in order for me to write that poem, I have to become the mirror. I have to live like the mirror, and that's why the process takes so long. I see my process of writing as a sculptor. I sculpt something into being.
Thank you. Wonderful answers again. I want to take a moment, Bomi, to thank you for the work that you have done tonight and that allows us who do not speak Korean to experience the brilliance of these poets live here on the screen with us tonight. Lee, I also want to thank you for the moderating you've done, extraordinary. And as was said earlier, you have brought this group together in a beautiful way. Deep thanks to EJ, Marci, and Ed. We are so grateful for the work you did to make these books in English. And to Kim Ki-taek and Iwan, our deep love and gratitude and joy that we get to have your work and live with it. I really hope everyone will race to get these books and to live with them and to experience the poetry in them. Thanks too to our audience. We have a great audience, lively, large, and interested. And as we close, I do want to mention that Rain Taxi will have other virtual events coming up, including our next 2 events, also international in scope. Finally, I want to thank Global Poetry at Metro State University for co-sponsoring this event and allowing it all to happen. We're out of time, but we hope to come together with you all again in some future fashion, and meanwhile to enjoy and experience your work. Thank you, and good night.